totally different than this. Oh, it's horrific. Oh, this is how we're gonna do it. Yeah, this is video number 115 of this DIY Expedition Camper video, and I can take you down memory lane from exactly 3 years ago when I picked up this camper brand new. It's a little bit bouncy without any camper on the back. It's a little bit noisy because there's no sound insulation, no sound deadening, anything like that. Well, that noise is all going to go away from everything we're going to do in this video, and of course, it's now has a camper on it. With many different kinds of insulation, some probably the right way, and some probably not as good of a way, but all being effective. So let's dive into it. All right, well, it's time to move on to the cab here now and actually start to make this a more habitable space, since we're spending a lot of time in it, hopefully, right, while driving on road trips and to places, and taking away all this terrible tinginess, right? So working away at it, you can see how it's already getting better, even next to here compared to over there. And then I also created some little offsets that I'm going to glue in, because like little pieces like this, they're flimsy, and I want to add some little bit of structural strength, but also to make sure the stuff doesn't just be vibrating, and add a little bit of more structural strength to the roof here, since it's got a lot of movement. So I'm going to glue in a piece of plywood I cut down right here. So I'm going to glue that with some of my good adhesive, and then I'm going to do the same back here as well into these channels to really keep this rear piece from being so flimsy, because it is really flimsy. That'll also strengthen up the roof a bit more here. Not that it probably needs it a lot. I'm not going to be walking around in it since I got the roof rack, but it'll keep it from moving around as much or buffeting and the wind and things like that, and just give a little more of all, structural rigidity, and take away some of this terrible tinginess, the other things. So I'm trying to get all these like base things then glued in so I can finish up then the insulation, and this is what it'll look like from the factory, other than the fact that there was a headliner in there. Pretty sparse and really no insulation anywhere. Now you can also see my Thinsulate that I have in here. I've cut that down. It's tucked all the way in down here, all the way there. You can see that I've got my acoustic liner all the way up, even up all the way as high as I can get it, all the way to where the window comes in. Press down as tight as I can so the window won't rub on it. The window may push on this, but that's partly why I'm using this Thinsulate, is not only will add a really nice amount of acoustical and thermal insulation, particularly here behind the speaker as well, and down here there's a lot of surface area and cold that can come in. Well, not really so much down here because it's outside, but it's still going to transfer. It's all the same amount of big chunk of metal, which is awesome, because then really I can put all this plastic wrap back, seal this goop back up all the way around, and then I can actually put the door panel back on, which is going to be really, really awesome to get that out of here. That in, I can actually then control my electric windows and door locks once again. That'll be a huge improvement or step up. All of this really goopy stuff that holds this plastic all the way down, this foam, nice little foam speaker thing. I did test it out before, but it's hard to hold the camera and everything else at the same time. Hopefully that's going to work. It really feels really tight, so we shall see if that's going to work. I hope I don't have to cut it or break it. But I've got this sealed down as well as I can. You can see there's a bit of a little gaps here because this stuff is messy. I think I'm going to do is just put a little bit of tape. I'm not really sure what the value of it is, but I'm going to put a little foam tape where I've got some little gaps here and here, and just to kind of cushion and give a little more insulation, cushion between the plastic and the metal, and give a little more insulation there. Yeah, you can see I got a little cut right there, small little cut, slice from reach my hand in there, and the screws and the metal, sharp metal, whatever that poke through, and somehow put a little slice in it, not a big deal. But anyway, so let me get that foam tape on there, get the speaker installed. And I'm sure this plastic is really there to keep wind or other air from transferring through, and also any condensation building with the doors. So I would have made sure it's sealed back up. All right, this is super exciting because this is actually my first trim panel going back on. Of course, this came off like 2 years ago, so let's hope I can remember how it goes back on, and it will all go back on. It's definitely a little bit tighter, but man, that actually went on incredibly easy. There's our clip. I should have looked where all those clips were. All right. Fantastic. Awesome. Yay! Okay. Look at that. It's kind of like a somewhat workable vehicle again. Let's hope this works. Let's test it out. Certainly works from the outside. Yes. And it locks, and it locks. Oh, bravo. It works. Okay, not a big deal, but no, it's all big accomplishments, especially when, like I said, I took that this trim piece off, I don't know when, a long time ago, 2 years ago roughly. Too long ago. So, the truck is coming back together. Now let's shut her down. Yahoo! Let's go do the other side. Get that thing insulated up. This is great. Test out the sound here. This is the door panel with all of the insulation in there. Sounds great. Now let's come over to one that has not been insulated. Wow. What a difference. Look at all that vibration and rattle. Ugh. Okay, let's go back over here. Look at that. I mean, I am pounding on this. All right, so now that I've validated that this insulation definitely makes a difference, and I know it's probably harder to hear on the video than it is in person, but just trust me, it makes a massive difference in the noise and vibration, the tinginess of it. So, going to pull this plastic off, go ahead and insulate up this other side. Boy, this plastic and this blue masking goop is nasty, and get this thing insulated up just like the other one, and quiet her down. So that way, it's going to sound much better. Okay, want to hear what this sounds like now? Really good. The most hollow spot is right in here, and that's where I'm going to put the Thinsulate. I could put a double layer of this, but I think that's just overkill. I've got this really well covered now. Now I'm going to cut a piece of it Thinsulate to just go in this lower portion so the window doesn't bind up on it. But before I do that, I'm going to actually plug in the door connector to the panel so I can try out the window. Let's do that right now. Just make sure the window doesn't bind up on anything I've already installed. And then I will go ahead and do the Thinsulate. Good. Great. Now I've got this Thinsulate stuffed down in there. It was a pain. I'll show you what I did. I do a little cutout right here for this vent, because the vent won't go all the way in if there isn't this little cutout, as I found the other one. I've got it really stuffed in here behind the speaker. It's going to be a little bit tight, but it should work. I've got to pull this wire through when I get there. I tucked these wires way out of the way from the window, pulled them all the way down into here, so they're out of the way and they shouldn't rattle. And now I know all this is good. Now what I got to do is pull all this plastic on this really sticky stuff and get it all re-stuck back on. And so I'll clean this up with some rubbing alcohol real quick, get it stuck back on, and then re-put the door panel on and hope that this doesn't cause too much resistance on the window when the window is coming down. It might, but the other one had a little resistance too, but I think it'll be fine. Alright, this stuff is really nasty. It's really hard to stick back on, and the plastic re-sticks back to this black bubble gum. Now what I'm going to do, I got some little couple of spots I just want to make sure I get covered where the bubble gum here came a little bit undone, and this will just give it not only stick to it, it's adhesive foam, sticks to it, covers up that little gap, keep any air transferring, like in here too. Give it just a little more vibration and insulation as well. If everything's good, we can put this panel back on. Okay, so what the whole thing looks like. A little bit of foam here to cover up that little gap or a little hole, this one here too. Everything else up. I put a couple more pieces of this seal mat just in between these two speaker mounts, just make sure they don't rattle against the metal, because I only got these two screw holes here on the door. I've got that all wired up, and so I just have to hook up these two wires to the door panel. Once I install that, you can see the Thinsulate down there. It's going to hit the window a little bit, but hopefully it doesn't have too much resistance on it. So I think we're good to go. Let's go ahead and mount this door panel, hook up the wires, and try it out. And that's it. Just snap this door panel back in, and boy, that is wonderful to get these trim pieces out of the garage and back into the cab. There's one clip, two clips, three clips. There's one somewhere in the middle here. 4, 5, 6. There it goes. I think that's it. All right. Okay. Let's power this up. Yay! We have music. We have light. Now let's check power window. Okay, let's do a little sound test here. Have some of this sound deadener mat installed. So here we go. Ready? Okay. So you can definitely tell there's quite the difference. I'm just going to keep adding it, and we'll keep deadening stuff and adding a little bit of thermal insulation, but most of the sound insulation here. You see, as I get further away from it, it gets a lot louder. Of course, some of you are probably going, geez, Casey, this is really pretty precarious. You got nothing down over your dashboard or your seats, and all of that. You are absolutely correct. This is definitely high risk, and not really high reward, just high risk. All right, let's see. I'm just trying to do this very carefully. I've had a lot of practice, but there it is. It's in. Now, of course, I have my hands all gooped up. And this should certainly make the mirror much more stable and not vibrate around so much. Boy, I really set myself up too much here for success. So I rounded off the edges there to fit within these rounded grooves here in the ceiling, and even gave a little rounded profile on the leading edge. So this is a little bit bigger, but you can see how flimsy that is. So hopefully this is going to seal up. I just have to make sure I have my rounded edge on the top. And I think maybe what I'll do here, instead of gluing the wood, and of course if I wasn't replacing the seats and almost all this interior, I would definitely have some plastic down underneath this before I went ahead and put it on. Don't drip, don't drip. It is a no drip formula, but can still drip. Okay, let's try that, how that works. There's one. I do have some glue on my gloves, so I gotta be very careful, make sure I'm all queued up in the right way. Well glued in. So I'm gonna put another bead of glue on the outside here. It's a messy endeavor. I gotta remember to basically swipe with my non-trigger hand. And I know you're probably wondering, like, is this really worth it? Well, I can tell you, this panel that was in there is very flimsy, and the roof even more flimsy, and they both vibrated even just when going down the road, at least noticeably, or seemed to be, and just even when tapping on it. So these little pieces of wood in here that are glued in definitely strengthen up both of them. Yeah, it's not going to make it so you can walk all over this roof, but it certainly at least reduces a lot of that vibration and or kind of resonance of the roof panel and the back panel. I'll wait till it dries, and then I'll test it and see just how much this strengthened it up, but I bet you it'd be a lot. Take a lot of that vibration out of there. See how we're doing here on this. putting in the sound dampening. I know this stuff's heavy. These sheets here are quite heavy, and that's one big downside of putting it up here on the ceiling of my lifting cab, but you can see what a difference it makes. Watch this here. I'll start over here. Here it's already dampened. Why did I choose the sound dampening instead of something else? Because I have some other forms of insulation I'll show you here in a moment. Again, because of this tinniness, this so badly needs some sound dampening here. And already you can see here too, even though this adhesive's not totally cured up yet, you can see this is already dampened up. See how much it vibrates over here. Almost wish I glued in some over here, which I thought that might be the issue, but the real wobble's in the middle, and now that wobble is out. Like, you just have barely a little movement there. So, and you see it's really dampened this up. So, big change. And for those of you with a very observant eye, hey, kudos to you. Those black strips on the ceiling, I glued in some black PVC angle to allow me to mount a center console and overhead center console, and I decided not to go that route, cut those out, and instead put in a half 80-20 track. You can see I put a little piece over there that now I have everything covered except for my middle sections, and you can see how it's just completely toned it out compared to that tinginess it had. But if we come over here, so a lot of tinginess. Come on back to this panel, we lose it because we have a real structural, higher strength steel. It's much thicker than this over here, this panel here. So I'm going to take a sheet and just basically encompass this piece without covering up these holes. And also, there's a big gap here. You can say get my entire finger length all the way in there. Don't mean to flip you all off. It's about 4 inches long probably, that there's a big opening here, big cavity, right? And it's just fully sealed up. It's all welded except for, of course, these openings on the inside. I think I'm going to do something really crazy. So I think I'm going to squirt some expanding foam in here, put the screws in where these go, so that we can always get the screws back out, thread those back out, make sure the sealant doesn't push through. But, I mean, it really is just a big cavity of metal and a lot of openings. And I'm not really seeing the value of not filling that up is. I could certainly see moisture and stuff getting trapped in there, but not likely. I mean, there's really very little airflow. There's no way moisture can really get in there except through the air, and that's going to be very minimal, and it really can't get trapped in there. I don't think it can with the expanded foam. I'm not going to be able to fill this entire cavity full. I can only really inject in some really through these openings here. So I'm only going to be able to just fill in some of this, and that'll at least hopefully take out some of this tinginess, create some insulation with the outside wall here, as you can hear that. Just a little bit, absorb some of that. I'm going to squirt some in here, but again, keep my screw holes open. Deadening mat here, at least I'll take out some of this tinginess. I can put some more over here after I put the expanding foam on. And I'm thinking of doing the same thing up here, is putting expanding foam into these cavities as well. I may use these to pull some wires through, but I'm not really certain that's the best spot to do it, because then they get kind of trapped in there and it's really hard to then ever get back to them if I ever need to. I'd rather have them so they're a little more like this, with a little more accessible or easier to pull through, but I'll have to kind of assess that. It's hard to do that, of course, without the headliner in, to understand exactly how that all fits in, but I'll have to expect that and kind of figure that out. And of course, I've got these screw holes here for the headliner visor. So this piece here already is so much more dead sounding now. It used to tang and it used to vibrate a lot. And of course, all I had is my little piece of plywood, and that's glued in. This glue is still curing. It's only about 10 hours old since I put it on. So it still has a lot of curing to do. And then I'll put in the rest of this deadening mat over these sections once all this really fully has a chance to cure and thus dry, because it has to absorb moisture in order for it to cure.
And of course, I could have installed a lot less this material on the roof to save money and weight and get probably about the same benefit, but I did it this way to really solidify up those other pieces.
Okay, interesting. Let's test out how much this really changed things. Not really all that much. It definitely took out quite a bit of this vibration, and this panel doesn't have it. It's significantly quieted down. This panel's quieted down, but not as much as I thought it would be. And in part because it's a pretty big panel. There's a lot of hollowness in there at the outside panel, but it still leaves dent in some of it. I'll obviously get, once I spray the expanding foam in there, I'll put another piece on here where I don't cover up the screw holes. and we'll give that a try. I don't see a lot of value in putting it back here because I think it's just adding a lot of weight because there's really not a lot of tinniness there. Better just add some insulation, some softer, lighter weight kind of foam insulation. This back panel probably needs some too, but again, I got to figure out if I'm going to shoot some expanding foam back in here or not. So for now, what an improvement. Once I get these covered and some in the middle here, it'll be dramatically quieter from all that vibration. And then I can figure out what to do next as far as to try to insulate this as well as I can, which is not going to be easy because this isn't really a well insulatable can. It's quite tinny. Insulate it. And I've talked about the insulation here on the roof. I've done that. Really dramatically has quieted down things. Also the vibration that this rear panel used to have. The challenge is, like, in this cavity here, it's just a big hole of this secondary piece of sheet metal that comes across here, and now you just got this big cavity with some little clip points for the headliner to clip into. And how do I really insulate that? You can't really pull any insulation in there really easily. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically stuff like a reflectives down into there, and I think that'll work pretty well. However, these rear panels, man, they really took a lot of effort to unclip. These clips are monster clips. They've really held it on, but I got them off. But now what I want to do is, the only way I can see how to insulate this panel here behind me along the side, which you can see is super hollow. I've got no way to get in here. This is all solid except for a hole right here and a hole right here. These two holes, a couple of small holes, and then of course the screw holes that I have. I put the screws back in. So I'm actually thinking about, crazy as it is, squirting some expanding foam in there. I know it's a risk and I can't over expand it, so I have to be careful about it, and I don't want it dripping or falling out, and that can happen inside this panel here, which you can hear is teeny and hollow as all hell. It's right next to your ears, going to be a terrible spot for sound transferring in, and I really have no good way to insulate it. This panel doesn't have a lot of gap behind it, very minimal gap, but a little bit, I can get a little bit of insulation on here, whether it's a deadening mat or a little bit of something else. That'll help, but I still got to allow my clips to go in and the bolts for the seatbelt to go in. But what I'm worried about is if I squirt expanding foam into here, it's all just going to fall down, which is okay if it kind of fills this cavity. It's not really, there's no real value or purpose to it. It'd be great actually if it completely filled up, but I know it's impossible. However, there's a big seatbelt attachment right here, so I'm going to unattach it. I don't want this expanding foam squirting down and get on the seatbelt, making a mess of it and all that. So I'm going to unbolt it, and I'll put the bolts back in. They are nutted, and I've already checked up here. These nuts, or the roof rack screws into, are welded in nuts as well as these are welded in nuts. So in theory, I could just squirt expanding foam in here as long as it doesn't get over filled and it pushes out or doesn't allow these clips to get in. That's going to be near impossible to control that with these tiny little openings and stuff, but I will do what I can. Once I have this seatbelt out, I have at least a big opening to see into here and hopefully spray some of the expanding foam down the bottom here. That'll help to create some sound deadening and a little bit of insulation. It's just amazing the amount of like kind of cavities and challenges are to get really good insulation in this space. So anyways, that's what I'm working on doing. But I'd really think I'd rather have expanding foam in here to give a little bit of strength into this sheet metal. I know it's very weak, and expanding foam will just quiet down some vibration and stuff. I put all the screws back in, so at least this way, I just unscrew them, and the expanding foam won't squirt out of where those are. Here's my plan. I'm going to try to fill in. You hear that? It's terrible. Now I added some sound deadening into here. Really hard to press any further up than about here, but you can see how much I deaden it, and then you get up here and it gets pretty hollow where I couldn't really get this sound deadener up higher. I can put some on the inside when I'm done here, but down low I still have quite a bit. There's a big hole cavity there. I see no reason why not to really just like try to squirt some expanding foam there, at least absorb some of the sound, a dampening, not overfill it. I've got to leave the can't have it spraying out these clip holes where the bolt is or anything like that. Just want to spray some in just to hopefully soften some of this movement and give it a little bit of both thermal and sound insulation. And then I'd love to really squirt some into this cavity here, but it's all just going to fall out here, and I need to keep this as open as possible for mounting in the the panel and the seat belt attachments. I can get my hand in only so far. And so I don't really, not a lot I can do there. I can squirt some in here, but I have to be really careful. It's just pretty much going to fall out. I'm really worried about this. I know this is a really bad idea probably, but I don't have any other better idea on how to really deal with this. So I'm going to give it a shot and we'll see how it goes. Just pause there. Let's try a little bit up here. All right, it's kind of a weird, funky way of doing this. I'm not really liking it at all, but like I said, I'm not really sure like what are better options I have.
And I thought very long and hard about how to fill in these cavities, this deep cavity in this intersection here, as well as some of these other sections or areas around the cab here. And I did not want to use spray foam at all. I did debate over it many times, but didn't have a lot of other methods to do it other than stuffing as much Thinsulate in very small little pieces in there. So I went ahead and did the expanding foam. I thought I gained some other benefits from it, just a more insulation value, but also a little bit of stiffening of these areas. And, you know, ultimately I think it turned out right, but it was definitely a precarious thing to go ahead and try to do.
I'm also really worried about this stuff, just not just plugging up a hole here that's going to be an important access hole, screw hole, whatever it is, but also falling out on me and or something here in the camper. I really don't have it myself in the camper properly sheathed for that. And of course this stuff is so hard to predict. How much is it going to expand? Almost one whole can now. Such a big cavity. I squirted so much in there and can barely even tell. Even in the bottom here, it's crazy. Expanding foam, sound deadening test. It's only really down here where the expanding foam was. Let's go to the other side. Look at that without the sound deadening up there. Big difference. Definitely a difference down here too. So let's keep it up. I think it's doing some good positive progress up there. Let's test this other one out up here too. Oh my God, that is incredibly quieter. I'm going to keep using it. I think it's doing good for these little tiny cavities. So let me show you what I've got done here. So I've got all this expanding foam filled up this cavity here. So this is totally softened up. You can see I got some push out, which is great. I know it's mostly filled up in these holes except for where I need a little bit of a gap. I can always trim off the excess. I'm going to wait till this dries. It's pretty much cured over so it's solid to the touch. I want to make sure it allows it to come out, you know, like you can see here. What I'm trying to do is make sure it just doesn't fall down, hence where the paper towels are down here and over the dash and stuff. Fortunately it hasn't. It's pretty good stuff in that it really holds well and doesn't fall out, and that's part of why I chose this stuff here, but nonetheless I just wanted to make sure to kind of help it. Now what I want to do is come back around over to here. I've got this whole corner really nicely insulated up underneath this panel. Hopefully there's enough gap between these clips here and the panel here for this thing to all clip on. Of course, I didn't go over any of the clips or where the seat belts go in. I'm just going to leave that exposed. I did stuff a big piece of Thinsulate that basically filled up this cavity up as high as I could, so it's all the way up in there. And that way that really gives some insulation, this big hole here. The bottom section here is all filled with expanding foam, so I know that's solid, and hence why it sounds beautifully solid. Right, and you come up here, you get a little more hollow, even though I put some of the sound deadener mat in behind here as high as I could get in here, but I can't get all the way up to here, and so I added a little bit expanding foam. You can see like through the hole here, but that's about it. And of course some of the sound dampener helped too, but I want to get some more of this actual insulation. The sound dampener isn't really a great thermal insulator. It'll help, but it's really good just about the sound insulation. Now I'm going to put some more of this mat on, which is really a thermal insulation. I'm just going to put a little piece across here. What I don't want to do is bulge out the headliner, have it so it gaps here, you know, you can see that, or push the panel out. This is definitely like a key area right where the ear is, or right across from the ear is. So I want to make sure I basically put at least a piece over here to help
insulate that thermally and add additional sound insulation as well. And then I've got to insulate, of course, that back section. Do the same over on that corner over there. Insulate it, and I can get these two trim pieces up, which are very much in my way right now. Get those back on, and then I can really start to insulate this back section, pull the floor out, insulate that, figure out what I need to do to mount my new seats. So there's a whole lot to do here, but I'm just going to keep jamming away. And then I got to figure out also like how to insulate better the ceiling. I think I'm going to add some Reflectix just kind of across the ceiling. Really lightweight, thin, but it'll give a little more sound and thermal insulation, which is really most important right now here. Awesome. Now, that is fantastic. That has got, look at that sound of the wall. It's beautiful how much quieter it is, and I've got all this great thermal insulation now in behind this panel up against the metal, which is where I want it. All right, I'm going to show you the benefits of sound dampening. I have some sound dampener in this wall, and of course all this expanding foam down here. So when I just tap down here, it's obviously quite solid. I get up here, it's obviously pretty hollow. I'm getting away from all that expanding foam where I couldn't do. Up here, I do have expanding foam and the sound dampener up in here. But when I hit down here, you're really nice and deadened. Got sound. This is all expanding foam about here, and then I have sound dampener up to about here. Hear that? And then really nothing in here. You can see just how hollow that sounds. And then up here again, I have expanding foam. Okay. So what I'm going to do is stuff some Thinsulate all the way up in here. The great benefit of Thinsulate, it's not only a great thermal and sound insulator, but I can stuff it really easily. It'll really stay in its place. It's also soft and pliable, so the seatbelt tensioner that'll be in here, it won't really matter if it rubs up against it or anything, if it falls down on it. It also won't push any pressure on these clips that have to go into here for this trim panel. It's going to go over here. So it's a really great way, and I can really stuff it up pretty nicely up in there. I could even use like a yardstick or something else to help stuff it up in there, which is what I'll do. And then once I have that up in there, then I can go and insulate all of this wall panel here is welded on, so it would have been a pain just to rip it off. So I'm just going to spray span foam, at least hold that and it won't vibrate. It'll strengthen this back panel up ever so slightly. This back panel is pretty good. Up here is not. That is really hollow up against there. Up in this cutout here, and then that'll at least deaden some of this back panel, and like I said, then put Reflectix up in here, and then I'll probably do the same all the way across the roof to create a little bit more insulation, sound, thermal insulation without really adding any real thickness. Just cut off a little piece. The great thing about Thinsulate is not only is it made for vehicles, but it doesn't break down or fall down. It also doesn't create all that dust like a fiberglass would from vibrations or pushing on it. You don't want to be breathing that or have that really broken down. It squishes up really nice. It's soft, you know, against the skin, everything, so you don't have to worry about that. And I can see it pushing up against these trim holdouts here, which is great. And I'm just going to keep stuffing that up and kind of do the same really in here as well. It doesn't really matter which way I put it. I'm basically putting the scrim in this case against the outside, only because it's a little bit thinner. It has less chance of really getting caught up on. There's a little metal rib that's back up in here, and so I just want to, you know, help to get up in there. And there we go. And now, hear how much more deadened that is already, even just though this Thinsulate is just gently tucked in here. This is a really important area because the head's going to be right here, ear right here, push, you know, so any of the sound that's going to be coming in, whether it's from resonance or just the transfer through the sheet metal, is really going to matter there. So that's going to be a key spot to put it. So now that's in, and hence why there's also for us to put insulation on here. Doing right in here with the expanding foam is really just to fill this cavity up. I can add a little bit more of this thermal insulation I'm going to put in here, and that'll create a little more of a sound dampener over this deadener, and that'll help as well. So I'm going to do that too. Now, of course, it's always hard to get this stuff into a really tight cavity. I could have, probably should have, kept the paper backing on. So I could have really got this exactly where I wanted with the paper backing, then pulled it off once it was in place. And of course I want to get, not only can press get some metal to get as much of the benefit, but also because I need space for the seat metal tensioner. It's going to go in here.
Great news about that, I got it pressed up against this expanding foam. On this side, I've got it pretty much up against where this Thinsulate is and all the way up against the front here. So I think that's good. That's great. Okay, now, stuff sticks on. Let's see how much difference just a little 2x4 inch piece makes on this back panel here. Listen now. Just tapping around there. This is about what I could fit in here. I'm going to try pushing it a little bit higher up in this panel. I probably could have won a little bit bigger one. Trying to get a little more into the middle of that panel. It'll have much more effect of absorbing that sound, deadening it. Now let's see. I'd say noticeably better. Just a tiny little piece. So it's amazing how even just a little piece like that can really have a material difference. It's at least a help. Spray foam into these holes here. This is my way of making sure that these little holes, which are where clips go to hold the headliner in, I just go ahead and take a little pick tool with a 90-degree hook on it, and I just scrape the hook around the inside there because those clips grab around the inside of the sheet metal, right? Make sure that sheet metal is clear. Usually I can pull out some of this foam. Sometimes it just pushes it in, breaks it down right around this hole. Keep pushing it in, working it out, and again, get some of this foam out of there. I'll then, once I feel like I've got plenty of good clearance for that clip to grab onto both the sheet metal and push into that space, I'll then hear it breaking down when I go around in there, that foam breaking down. And then I'll go into the vacuum, just put it on there and just try to suck out any last bits of this, just so make sure I've got the clearance for the clip to grab. What I think does the trick is just taking that 90-degree and just pulling it around the sheet metal on the inside.
Installing here is your 5mm Reflectix thermal insulation foil foam core double-sided radiant barrier, not your big box store radiant barrier for an addict.
Insulating the cab is a little bit challenging. It's very small, but still it's a little bit challenging because, yes, of course, there's always tons of curves. There's really no more panels or anything like that. All of this nice sealing that was so resonating is now sealed up, or at least deadened. These walls are also mostly deadened from expanding foam where I could squirt it in where it didn't matter. I also squirted expanded foam in here where I could, but left these, of course, holes open, and then crammed a bunch of Reflectix down into this hole. It was mostly filled with expanding foam, but really I crammed it as much as I could. I know like some Thinsulate would have been far better, but I was out of Thinsulate. So really this whole back panel now no longer vibrates. It's got a nice sound deadening. You can tell that from the expanding foam, the little bit of deadening where I could get it in, create some additional insulation. It's not the best form of insulation for this at all. Thinsulate would have been far better. I probably would have filled the whole thing expanding foam, but this gap is about 3 inches deep and about 6-7 inches wide. So the expanding foam never really dries in there. It kind of skins over and blocks itself from really fully curing. So I wanted to, of course, make sure I got that done well. And then I'm going to take, of course, some of this proper Reflectix insulation. I'm going to glue it in here from this seam up here. I've got to keep the center channel available for the headliner to clip in here. So I'm going to glue it in up to here. That'll basically cover this and up to against the wall here, just below where these screw holes and stuff mount. And again, just kind of down about 2 inches or so here, so I can make sure I keep all these holes open. I'll really get a good insulation from that. The headliner is going to add a lot more insulation as well. Extra Reflectix here will do that. And I think spray adhesive, I'm probably just going to spray it on this and make sure I have good alignment. And I think that's it, because it's going to be really hard to not just spray it on all this and not get it all over and have it fall down and everything, which would be a mess. So instead of spraying in here, where it'll get like all over, make a mess, it's really hard to clean up, if at all, I'm just going to take this outside, lay it down on a box, spray this side, and then just go ahead and get my alignment up here and push it into place. And I think that's going to be my best way to do it. And I think the spray adhesive is going to be just fine for this, particularly because it's also going to be held up by the headliner itself once that gets installed. And then I'm basically going to do the same up in the front, but you can see I did not go over where the factory marker light cables are, because I'm going to actually create like a conduit with Reflectix as well over that and give some more additional insulation there where it's really kind of needed. That part does get hit by the sun. I've obviously got the sound deadened, but I want to make sure I have insulation in addition to the headliner. It's not a lot of area anymore that's left, but a little bit of Reflectix layer will help both hold in the heat and keep it out, and then of course create a little bit of a additional sound insulation, but also by creating like a pocket, like a U-shaped channel like this, that'll glue that Reflectix in. There's about another like almost 3 inches of gap there. I can use that to basically create this nice pocket for wires to go down this A pillar channel and get it up into that space in the center. Don't have too many wires in there, but enough that it'll definitely help to do that. And especially when I don't know exactly what I'm going to be adding later, but at least all that channel in. If I have the headliner in, I can get the wire up into that little crevice of the headliner, should be able to pull it through to that center for stuff I don't count on and know.
So for installing this thermal insulation foil foam core, simply just applying that spray adhesive foam onto the back side of it, of course after measuring it, cutting it down, and then go ahead and pressing it in and rolling it out.
It's going to all be held up by the headliner. Anyways, that's in. It seems to be pretty good. Now I can focus on the front one. Get that insulated on the side here. That's a key area to add more insulation, and yet keep these screw holes available for the parts that got to go up against those. And so let's get.
And this 5mm Reflectix foam core insulation was really great for up here because there was very limited space between the headliner and the ceiling itself for any additional insulation. So this just simply go ahead and filled it in, and really about the only thing I could use for this very thin space.
I am using spray adhesive number 90 by 3M, high strength number 90 spray adhesive. I'm spraying it down, letting it go ahead and set up for about, I would say about 5 minutes, maybe a little less. And then all I do is press this up. I wait till this gets just tacky, and then I index up to the edge here because that's where I measured from, and make sure I've got my straight edge going right along my railing here. And if all that's good, just keep rolling it into place. I want to roll it into place. It's following a curved shape on the sides here, and ultimately up to the ceiling here. And now I've got to cut this flap out and tuck in this flap underneath the mirror mount. So this way I'm utilizing what I have here for some extra insulation into this mirror cavity that really I can't really insulate really in a good way. And what I'm doing here is making sure, one, I've got to stay above this right here, because that is of course where all things start getting attached to it. And ideally is push it right up into that crevice and cavity. Same over here. You can see it's already starting to kind of come undone with that pressure. And I actually want it to bubble up a little bit at the front here because I've got basically an air gap at the front between the headliner and the body cavity. Body cavity sounds terrible. Just doing car work here, guys. That's it. And I want a little hole here so I can get up from this A pillar into this cavity here, this, call it, a little bubble I'm making. And this one's not really sticking so well. This was a brand new bottle of the spray adhesive. Maybe it didn't spray out so well. Maybe it dried too much. The sun is just starting to come up. I'll take my little cutoffs. Again, where I can't really get a lot of insulation in there. Just stick them right up in here, in this cavity. It's gonna definitely get some sun baking on it, right at the very front here. That way I'm making use of those scraps. I'm gonna call this done. Now I just have to get this whole back wall, this area and these corners, some kind of fabric glued on because the plastic's not gonna work. So I gotta get some fabric and glue that on, and that's gonna be a little tricky and ugly, and especially because I gotta go around the outside of the pass-through frame, and that's gonna be really hard to both go around the outside and the inside, and then trim it out on the trim there on the edge. Yeah, but you know, this project isn't just about mechanical, electrical, structural engineering, movements, controls. But obviously, you got to involve some upholstery too.
So with that, here's some pictures of really the finished insulation, the combination of Thinsulate, the Reflectix foam core, and also, of course, the sound deadener, and then even spray foam. Yes, the dreaded spray foam in the vehicle. I think it's a really bad idea, but I think in this case is probably a necessity in certainly certain these small cavities. So with that overall, I know it definitely dramatically improved the noise, and I'll do another sound test actually further on in a future video driving down the road, and we'll compare that with the future or the past video of driving down the road. And I'll also go ahead and show some more about the finished product with the headliner in there, and of course the finished floor and the new seats that are going to go in a future video as well, and all that went in and how that all turned out. There's still a lot to go into this cab to finish it all up, but this was a big step to get there, and now there's a whole lot of other videos coming up that I kind of lost track of because there's so many things going on everywhere, from solar panels to plumbing to electrical to air conditioning on this big expedition camper project. Appreciate you watching and sharing with others, and certainly look forward to sharing more with you on future videos.